What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is of course the 2021 Ford Bronco Sport. Huge thanks to Ford for providing me here with the all-new Bronco Sport to review for you guys today. So about the little Bronco Sport. So for anyone that's not familiar, this has nothing to do with the actual real Bronco. This has similar styling, but aside from that in the name, those are the only two things it really shares with that big Bronco. So this is actually more close to the Escape than it is to the Bronco mechanically, but this is actually much different than an Escape as well. So it's a very unique thing here, and I first have to say I just love the looks of it. It really has this charming look to it. Up front, I like the little retro design cues. I'm a sucker for retro stuff, and so having the white lettering there on the grille, along with the round headlamps there with the nice little LED rings and the little line there that connects into the grille. It's just a very, truck-like front end there, but in kind of, a more charming and, like I said, just friendly way. But as far as the dimensions go, this might actually be a little bit smaller than you're expecting. It's technically classified as a subcompact crossover, so it's actually about 8 inches shorter than a Ford Escape, and it's on a 1.6 inch shorter wheelbase. So smaller dimensions, is actually 3 inches more narrow as well, but it's 4 inches taller than an Escape. So, that's definitely that boxy shape that a lot of people love, and that certainly makes this more versatile, from a cargo standpoint, having that much taller cargo area to stack things. Coming down to the sides here, I also really like some of the little touches. Again, nice and square and boxy, and you have this little fender garnish here, which isn't a real vent, but kind of looks like a vent. You have your Outer Banks badge here. The Outer Banks version, by the way, is the more luxurious trim before you get to the faster and more off-road ready Badlands version, which is the top of the range here, aside from the first edition, which is just available here for this year. You also have these 18-inch wheels, which I think look really nice. I like the gray and silver combo to those, and this also has some slightly low-profile tires. They're 60 series sidewalls instead of the 65 series sidewalls you'll get on other models, and you can also get 17-inch wheels on lower trims, but I think these 18s look really, really nice. And also coming down to the sides, I really like how, it still is pretty rugged looking. You have the plastic fender flares and the side skirts. You still have plastic mirror caps here. And, so it does have this little more of a rugged look even on this Outer Banks version, which is kind of the more luxurious and most comfortable version, the least off-road ready of the bunch, but still has some of those rugged cues, which I think are nice to have. And then I also love how the side profile here, it has this safari style roof, where the roof here around the C-pillar area kind of juts up. And you see that same thing reflected in the body line there around that C-pillar, where it kind of, angles upwards there a little bit. And I really like that about it. I think it gives it some more visual appeal here and makes it a little bit more interesting, along with that very chunky C-pillar you have there, which also kind of blends in nicely here with the tinted windows and whatnot, but is a cool little touch as well. Then going out to the back there, I really like, you have the distinctive taillights there with the nice red LED ring there around the edges of them, and the bold Bronco Sport lettering there on the back, so that no one mistakes this for anything else. And I also really like how the hatch is kind of unique. So it does open regularly like a normal hatch, but you also have the little glass portion that opens separately if you want to just throw things in there. You don't need to open up the whole hatch. And so it's nice that you have that, capability as well. And just a nice, squared off back end there. Again, makes for maximum versatility while still keeping the dimensions nice and compact here. And, that makes it very easy to parallel park and all that kind of stuff with the shorter overhangs and whatnot. And so, yeah, I think from every single angle, they really knocked it out of the park with this thing. It's a really nice thing. It just kind of puts a smile on your face when you walk up to it and look at it. It's just a really cool look. All right, so let's start up and go for a drive. The Bronco Sport here does have this unique Bronco key, and I really like that they customized it here for the Bronco Sport. Otherwise, though, it's the same standard Ford key, which is a nice key. It's a little on the thick side, but has some nice metal-plated buttons there on the back, and overall, still a really nice key. But of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push-button start here in the Outer Banks trim of the Bronco Sport. I believe lower trims might not have all that, but here in this one it does. And so anyway, just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. Also, if you're curious to hear about the interior in the Bronco Sport, my wife and I actually just did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. But overall, it's definitely more off-road oriented with being rugged and durable, but it does have some nice, little luxury touches here with the seats, and it does have some nice features like a heated steering wheel and stuff, but definitely the materials and stuff are, a good bit below some of the most luxurious vehicles in this segment. All right, so setting off here in the Bronco Sport. So I think the first thing that I noticed here, it's just a very cool feeling just from the first time you set off on a drive in this vehicle. I think part of that has to do with the visibility here. You know, you have the very boxy shape, and you know, you're sitting up a little bit higher in typical, you know, crossover fashion here, but it's just a really fun view forward there. You have these two bulges in the hood and the very squared off fenders, which are a very cool look. Visibility is excellent, by the way, of course, thanks to the large, you know, windows. You have a nice, pretty thin A-pillar as well. Great view out of the sides, and view out of the back is also really good in typical SUV fashion, although I will note that the rear wiper is a pretty tiny wiper, and so once that window gets pretty dirty, your visibility will be much less because you'll just have a little area from wherever that wiper can hit. So that is going to be one thing you'll notice, you know, in the winter time, or if you're really getting this thing dirty, you know, that'll get to be a lot less visibility there out of the back. But aside from that, like I said, excellent visibility. Another thing that I do notice right off the bat here as well is that all the controls for like the brake and the gas are a little bit on the touchy side. You have to be a little bit more gentle with your brake inputs if you want to be smooth, and gas pedal is very jumpy. I mean, the second you breathe on that gas pedal, it feels like it wants to just you know, spring forward. And so, you know, it just takes a little bit of fine tuning with your inputs to make sure you're smooth in this thing. But if you're on the very first test drive in one of these, don't feel bad if you're a little jerky or, you know, just jumpy with your accelerations and stuff, because I was as well, and I drive a different vehicle every week here with my job. So yeah, but otherwise, you know, it's nice and smooth acceleration here in this little 3-cylinder engine. Doesn't really make too much noise, honestly, and I'll talk more about that once we're accelerating and whatnot. The ride's also pretty smooth here in the Bronco Sport, especially in this Outer Banks trim. If you go for one of the you know, more aggressive trims, like the Badlands trim primarily is the one where, you know, it has the upgraded off-road ready suspension, and that's going to, you know, probably have a little bit more of a truck-like ride. This isn't as smooth as a Ford Escape, for example, but it is still, you know, totally comfortable for a daily driver. I've already put about 50 miles on this vehicle so far. No complaints with the ride, really, and it fits with, you know, the way this vehicle looks and all that. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and use these GOAT modes, which means go over any terrain. I'm going to put that up into the sport mode. There's just a sand mode and a slippery mode, and as well as eco here for the Bronco Sport. So there isn't any of the more advanced modes you'll get in, I believe, the Badlands version and stuff. But anyway, in sport mode here, let's turn down onto this back road and see how it does. And here we go. Pretty responsive, and it pulls pretty well, so it's not going to take your breath away, but it's adequate. It's adequate performance, and for this segment of vehicle, it is totally on par, average for the segment. So runs a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder turbo engine, and so 3 cylinders is a little bit less than some of them, although the Jeep Renegade also does have a 1.3 liter tiny little engine as well. But so this 3-cylinder, don't be worried about, oh no, it's only 3 cylinders. Still plenty of punch. 181 horsepower, 190 pound-feet of torque, and that is right in line with what you get with a lot of the other stuff. And even, you know, like for example, the Subaru Crosstrek, even with its most powerful engine, which is a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, even with that, you're only doing about this same amount of horsepower and actually less torque than you get here with this little 3-cylinder. So don't be afraid of that 3-cylinder. It's very punchy, and they tune it to have really nice low-end grunts so that, you know, the power comes on nice and early. You don't have to rev this thing up super high or anything. You just dip into the gas a little bit and you get some nice forward thrust. 0 to 60 time, Motor Trend got an 8.6 seconds 0 to 60, and that was with them brake torquing and turning off traction control and everything else. If you're just flooring it from a red light, you'll probably see something around a 9 seconds 0 to 60, which again is, you know, pretty average for this segment. I think stuff like the Jeep Compass actually is a little bit slower. Those are around a 10 second 0 to 60 time. So this isn't the worst. It's not the best either. If you do want the most power possible in a Bronco Sport, that Badlands trim does give you the 2 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, and that one will do 250 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. And that's one of the most powerful vehicles in the subcompact crossover segment. The only one that beats it is the Mazda CX-30, which has the same horsepower but does have 320 pound-feet of torque, so a lot more torque than that. That's going to be the acceleration champ in the subcompact segment, but that also is much less off-road capable than that Badlands trim, which does also have a more advanced 4-wheel drive mode with a 4-wheel drive low setting, a torque vectoring rear diff, a lot of other, you know, upgraded suspension. It has about an extra inch of ground clearance, all those types of things. You don't get as advanced of a system in this. You do get standard 4-wheel drive in Bronco Sports, but it doesn't really have any kind of low mode or anything like that. But anyway, we're coming up some corners here, and let's see how this Bronco Sport handles. Okay, so not bad. I think you do feel the higher height of this. It certainly doesn't handle as well around corners as a Ford Escape. But that's to be expected because, you know, you have the better ground clearance here. And so, you know, it does do pretty well. I think it's about 7.9 inches of ground clearance for this version, for the Outer Banks version here. But yeah, so you have all-season 225 wide tires, and even with that slightly lower sidewall of these 60 series, you know, you'll get 65 series sidewalls on the other versions of the Bronco Sport. You know, so this is a little bit sportier, but it's still, you can tell it has fairly low limits. You can't drive this like a sports car. You can't, you know, chuck it into a corner and expect it to be totally fine. You know, this has a more truck-like ride. If you want something that handles more like a car, the Ford Escape is going to be the better choice for you, or any of the other competing brands and their, you know, crossovers in this segment. You know, but this does handle fairly well. I like that the steering is nice and light and feels pretty eager. It does have pretty decent weighting to it, although sometimes it feels a little bit artificial with its weighting, but not too bad. I think, you know, most people will be totally okay with all of that. But especially here in sport mode, this engine really does pull well, and it doesn't feel as slow to me as some others were complaining that it does. I mean, you know, yeah, the numbers aren't great. A 0 to 60 time of 8.6 seconds isn't anything to get excited about at all. But you know, for a type of vehicle like this, totally sufficient, totally fine. I would love to try that more powerful engine here in the Badlands version, but you know, for the average person, I don't think you're gonna have any complaints with power. And honestly, depending on what you're coming out of, I mean, you might hop into this and be like, wow, this thing is a little rocket, because it actually kind of feels like that at low speeds. Once you're merging onto the highway and you're getting into higher speeds, that's where this could probably feel a little bit slower. But, you know, normal kind of commuting speeds and stuff, I don't think this feels slow at all. I think it actually feels pretty punchy for what it is. And also, the engine sounds a little coarse sometimes, but I think that actually fits with the nature of, you know, the Bronco Sport and its appearance and stuff. So having a little bit of a more trucky sound to the engine, totally okay as well. Now, this engine in an Escape, probably not as nice, and I'd probably be like, wow, it sounds a little unrefined. In this, it works, it fits, and so I don't have any complaints with that either. But I mean, even this road isn't really too smooth, you know, and it still isn't generating too much road noise here. It's really quite refined, and I'm pretty impressed with, yeah, I mean, again, the ride is a little bit more trucky than an Escape, but it is, I'm really splitting hairs here. This is very comfortable. You know, I could drive this thing across country without any complaints as far as comfort goes. Totally fine in that regard. And so I think this is going to be really great for a lot of people, and just, you know, for the 99% of the time you're driving on normal roads, even if you do plan to go off the beaten path every once in a while, you know, still a majority of the time you're going to be on the roads. And for that, I think this is, you know, got really good road manners. I think another thing that really helps this in corners, though, that even though it doesn't, you know, feel super sharp or anything, it does feel light and eager. In addition to the light steering, it's also a fairly light crossover. I mean, it is a little heavy for a subcompact, but for a compact crossover, it's totally, you know, in line with the rest. So this weighs about 3,580 pounds for this Outer Banks version. So I think that also kind of helps this to, again, just, it feels very eager, and it's a nice little runaround kind of vehicle. You know, running my errands the past day or so here, I really just enjoyed it because it just feels very nimble, you know, especially in the city streets and things like that. I love the smaller dimensions of this. All right, so now we're out on the highway here in the Bronco Sport. You know, you hear a little bit of road noise, and this, again, is a very windy day, so hard to judge the wind noise, but so it's such a nice cruiser, again, just so comfortable. But, you know, I'm going to test out this little 3-cylinder here on the highway, see, like, doing a normal pass, how that does. So it's still, you know, it's not that slow, honestly. It gets up to speed pretty well. And even if you don't floor it, you just dip into that turbo boost, and it gives you some nice acceleration that way as well. Also, so this one does have the adaptive cruise control system, which is optional. So you do get Ford's Copilot 360 system as standard, and so that gives you the blind spot monitoring, the automatic emergency braking, rear cross traffic alert, as well as automatic high beams. But if you pay an extra $795, that's how you get the adaptive cruise control, which does have lane centering. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on all this stuff here. There's a bunch of controls on the steering wheel here. So first you actually set the cruise control, and then there's a little steering wheel button you hit, and that's how it helps to do the actual lane centering for you. So I'm just hovering my hands on the wheel. We're going around a corner here now, and it is actually doing the steering for me pretty well here. So I was actually pretty impressed with this system in the new F-150 as well, where it's the most advanced system in a truck. Now that is down the road going to have the ability to do truly hands-free driving. Nothing like that here in the Bronco Sport, at least not yet. But, you know, so just letting it do its thing here and just cruising on the highway, it's doing pretty well. It definitely favors the shoulder more, so that is one thing. It's not going on the shoulder, but it's staying closer to the shoulder line than the middle line here, which I'm actually totally comfortable with, because I'd rather stay away from traffic as well. So staying closer to the shoulder is, you know, totally okay with me. And it is doing a pretty good job. You know, it's not going over the road lines here. I'm monitoring it very closely, but it is getting really close and a little closer than I'd like. This is more so a lane keeping system still than it is lane centering, because it's not actually keeping me centered in my lane, but it's keeping me in the lane without me actually really doing any steering input on my own. So it is doing a pretty good job. It doesn't give me quite as much confidence as some of the better systems. Like Honda's system really feels like you're on rails and it is locked onto those road lines and it will not go over the line. Nissan's Pro Pilot system also is very good about keeping you totally centered in your lane. And so there are some systems that are better by a little bit, but I think this is still towards the top of the pack. Does a really good job. And I think if you do have this system, you know, you'll notice that on longer drives it really does take away some of the fatigue, because you don't have to make all those micro adjustments. I mean, you still have to keep your hands on the wheel and still be making sure the car is, you know, doing its correct thing and stuff, and, you know, assisting with the steering a little bit here and there. But even on these, you know, pretty curvy highways here in Western Pennsylvania, it's taking the corners totally fine and doing a really good job. And so I'm pretty happy with this system. And I think for only $795, if you do a lot of highway driving, 100%, that is an easy no-brainer option to get, and it's not a huge jump up either. And by the way, that is an option you can add on to lower trims of the Bronco Sport as well. It's not only here on this Outer Banks version. So yeah, I think safety tech is pretty good here in the Bronco Sport. And but yeah, so anyway, thanks to Ford though. I'm going to have the Bronco Sport here for another few days, and so I'm going to drive all over the place, and I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing and its competition, and anything else here that I noticed during my week of driving. Alright, so I've been driving the Bronco Sport here for about a week now, and this little car has really grown on me. I really like this little thing, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I have now grown to like it. It really does grow on you, and yeah, I just found myself kind of being surprised. Like, I'm really enjoying driving this thing. Like, it puts a smile on my face when I walk out to it. I just love the styling. And then, but whenever you hop in it and drive, it's just a little bit more of a fun experience, a little bit more character. Actually, a lot more character than most of the other crossovers in this segment. And even some of the slightly more character-filled stuff like the Jeep Renegade, I actually enjoyed this a lot more than the Renegade whenever I was driving that around not too long ago. And so, yeah, I don't know, there's just a sense of fun about the Bronco Sport, and almost a little bit of a sense of an occasion. Like, it's a little bit more of an adventure, you know, doing your errands in a Bronco Sport versus just any of the other ho-hum crossovers in this segment. And so, yeah, I even also just got to do a little bit more testing of the lane keeping assist system that they have here on the highway, the lane centering system, and that actually has been doing better and better. So it was favoring the shoulder strangely in that first segment that I was on the highway for, but in later testing here, it's really gotten to do a really good job. And yes, it still sometimes favors the shoulder a little bit, but it never went onto the shoulder for me. It was always pretty well centered in his lane, wasn't pogoing around, wasn't sloppy with its steering, never really made me too nervous. And so honestly, I have to rank this lane centering system up there among the top in this class. Now, I wasn't super impressed with everything in the Bronco Sport, and there were still a few downsides. One of the downsides was that the headlights, I don't know if it's just maybe this one or all of them, but the headlights are strangely pointed down, like a little bit lower than I think they should be. And so my nighttime visibility, even though it was pretty good with the LED headlights you have here in this you know, Outer Banks version, it's still just like the lighting just ended really short, and I was wishing I had more distance there to my headlights, and so it didn't make for great nighttime visibility. You know, maybe you can angle those up a little bit more to give you a little bit more distance, and that could just be this car, I'm not sure. But just keep in mind, maybe test drive one at night and see, you know, how the headlights are to you. But I mean, brightness is great, it's just that they don't go very far. Another thing is there's been a couple little rattles in this one. Now, this is, you know, very early production, so, you know, maybe that's part of the reason why, but there was some strange like a rattle around the B-pillar area. On the outside it sounded like, because it sounded like something was flapping in the wind, but I looked around, I couldn't see anything that was loose. I'm not sure what's causing that noise. And then every once in a while there's an odd rattle in the cabin here as well that kind of comes and goes. Now this vehicle only has about 5,700 miles on it, so not even 6,000 miles, and it's got a couple little rattles and stuff. I don't know, again, how the longevity will be for these. This is a brand new model on a brand new platform, really, and so it's going to be hard to say, very early on here. But it's not quite as solid as some other priced vehicles, that I usually test as far as rattles and stuff like that go. So one other little thing to keep in mind there. And my last minor complaint is that this 8-speed automatic transmission this vehicle has, I really do like the 8-speed auto. This whole powertrain combination in general, I just like a lot better than most of the others that either run CVTs or their engines aren't as good as this. This little 3-cylinder just feels so eager and so just ready to go. And it's just the way they tuned it with the throttle response and just the very punchy low-end torque you get here out of this little engine. It really feels stronger than the numbers suggest. And honestly, I did review the Renegade with its new little 1.3 liter, even smaller, but that's a 4-cylinder turbo in that. That does about 20 more pound-feet of torque than this motor. That motor is much more peaky, and I really had to wring that thing out a lot more to get moving, and it wasn't as smooth. It was a more frustrating driving experience. The power is always right there when you need it, and this actually felt faster to me than that Renegade, even though the Renegade has slightly better numbers there with its optional upgraded engine there. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed with that. But this 8-speed automatic, the only thing is it's not always smooth. There's been a couple of times where I've caught it out of the wrong gear, and it's had to hurry up and give me a downshift, and there were a few times where I was waiting for it to do the right thing. So it's not perfect. Maybe that's something that we'll learn, my driving habits, if you actually own one of these and kind of adapt it to that kind of driving style. So that could be something that gets better over time. But as it is right now, just there's a few times where the 8-speed auto wasn't perfect. But again, I will take 1 or 2 times where it's in the wrong gear for a split second over the CVTs and most of the competitors, which are just dreadful and drone and still don't feel natural. This feels normal, natural 8-speed automatic. No surprises, no weirdness, and yeah, so I much prefer this over most of the other setups you get in most of the competing vehicles. But the last 2 things to mention here are my fuel economy and the pricing of these Bronco Sport. So first, fuel economy. I've driven this vehicle 157 miles here, and my fuel economy average has been 23.7 mpg. So they're rated at 25 in the city, 28 on the highway, and 26 combined. And my driving was mostly suburban around town stuff, a few little stints on the highway, but nothing super long or extended, and so this is, I would say I was expecting to get close to that city number, and I'm, just barely over 1 mpg off of the city number, which isn't too bad. Generally, in my type of driving, I usually end up getting about 2 to 3 mpg less than the city rating in most other vehicles. So this engine is, performing a little bit better. It still isn't super impressive in my opinion. It's a tiny little 3-cylinder engine, so I was expecting it to, maybe do a little bit better. But the thing with these engines, and any kind of turbocharged engine in general, is, when you're getting on those turbos and you're getting, decent acceleration out of it, turbos really drain down that fuel economy, and so that's why this is, if you do actually have a little bit of a lead foot, it's going to drain that gas. And so even though we have a little 3-cylinder engine, I'm still only managing 23.7 mpg. Now granted, this thing has horrible aerodynamics, it's very blocky, and that's kind of one of the things you give up, and that's why so many of the mainstream crossovers have gone to more streamlined designs, is because it allows them to get better fuel economy, of slightly better aerodynamics, and that's something you do sacrifice here for the styling of the Bronco Sport. And then the last thing to mention here is the pricing and how this compares to its competition. So that is really the one thing about the Bronco Sport that's a little bit of a tough sell is its pricing. These are a little bit pricey, and so I can only compare MSRPs regardless of what kind of deals you'll get either now or down the road. That's hard to say. But as of right now, these start just under $27,000 at $26,850, and then this one, as tested, is just over $36,000 as tested. So 36 grand for what is technically a subcompact crossover is right towards the top of the pack as far as how expensive it is. I mean, really, the only way you can outdo this is, you know, basically a Jeep Renegade, you know, with their top trims, they can also get, you know, close to 40 grand. But basically everything else is going to come in under this as far as pricing goes. Now, this is one of the most off-road ready vehicles, and of course, you have the unique styling, you have, you know, the unique features like the, you know, opening rear glass. You also do have a more square cargo space than what you get in most of the competitors, basically all the competitors. And so, you know, you're going to have more usable space. So there are some certain unique things to the Bronco Sport that might warrant the extra pricing over, you know, all the other competitors. But, you know, like the Jeep Renegade, you know, it does also have a square hatch, but the Renegade, that generation has been around for, you know, over 5 years now. I think it's been closer to 7 years at this point. So a little bit of a dated platform and design and stuff like that. And the interior, I don't think is quite as nice, less refined with the engine and all that kind of stuff. And a little bit quirkier, but I personally actually think that this feels more enjoyable to drive than the Renegade. So I would take this over Renegade myself. But, you know, it really just comes down to how much of that off-road, you know, either capability or the off-road kind of looks and the blocky, you know, styling and stuff. It really comes down to how much you want that stuff. If, you know, you're like me and you really love the retro looks and you like, you know, it's ready to go kind of vibe, then, you know, there's very few things really that compete outside of the Renegade. There are some other crossovers that, you know, this does compete with, and there's a million different options you can go for these days. You know, I mean, for example, you can get a Subaru Crosstrek for, you know, several $1,000s less than this vehicle, but, you know, you're going to have a few less features in that than you do here in this. And also, you know, that $36,000 price tag is something that you can get lower depending on what features you want. So, you know, like for example, this is an Outer Banks edition with the Outer Banks package, which is kind of weird. It's the same name, but that extra package adds the B&O Play stereo, the power moonroof, and one or two other small things. I think the wireless charging pad. And so, you know, if you don't care about that stuff, you can get this down to, you know, maybe $34,500 instead, make it a little bit more affordable that way. You can also go like one trim down, go for a Big Bend edition. If you're okay with cloth seats, you can add on a Big Bend package on top of the Big Bend trim. Again, so confusing they call it that. Anyway, but that gives you heated seats. You lose the heated steering wheel, and then you lose like the black roof and the 18-inch wheels and a couple of little things. LED DRLs, you get the little bar, but you don't get the ring around the headlights like you do on these Outer Banks. Anyway, a few of those little downgrades, if you're okay with, you know, you can get a Big Bend version for, you know, about $32,000, you know, all in, you know, with one of those with the heated seats still and all that. So if you're okay with a little bit less equipment, you know, 32 is a little bit more reasonable, again, from a starting MSRP kind of pricing standpoint. So, you know, it really comes down to how much you're looking for out of, you know, your Bronco Sport and stuff. But it's just undeniable, though, that you can get a lot more vehicle for the same or less money with most of the competitors. I mean, you know, this is priced like a actual regular compact SUV, and they're fully loaded trims. I mean, you can get a fully loaded Honda CR-V for the same money. You can get a fully loaded Toyota RAV4 basically for about the same money. They even have like an adventure trim for the RAV4, which again you can get for the same money, and those even add something like, you know, ventilated seats, which you don't get here in this. You only have the heated seats here. So you do get a couple extra little features sometimes too, and you're getting way more space, because that is the one thing, is this thing is a little bit smaller than I think a lot of people are going to be expecting. And, you know, if it's only going to be a two-seater, fine, or if you're, you know, on the shorter side and you only have shorter passengers typically, you know, you can make this work probably. But if you're someone who needs a reasonably sized back seat that's not going to feel cramped, you're going to be better off going for those compact SUVs. And even like a Ford Escape, for example, you know, plays in that compact SUV class. Same basic price as this Bronco Sport with more room, better fuel economy, but again, a whole lot less character. And, you know, even though you're giving up space and stuff, hands down, I like this 10 times better than the Escape. The Escape is a fine SUV, but not nearly as fun, not nearly as much character. And so even at the same price point, I would give up some space for the more fun character here of this over an Escape. So, but the Escape is another option. But, you know, even if you do want something with a little bit more off-road capability, you know, you can get like an actual Subaru Outback, not even a Crosstrek. You can get an Outback for the same price, which also has, you know, heated steering wheel, like a touring trim. They have ventilated seats. They have a huge touchscreen in that touring trim, and lots of ground clearance, very versatile. You can get one of those for the same $36,000, and you have way more space, you know, a really large cargo area and all that. Again, no retro looks, no cute boxy shape or anything. So again, it just comes back to how important that kind of stuff is to you. But, you know, an Outback, a fully loaded Outback, is a very compelling thing for the same money if, you do value space and, all that. So, but then with that, you end up going in with a CVT transmission. And again, it's just not as exciting of a powertrain as this with the 8-speed automatic is and stuff. So certainly there's some compromises there, but I just wanted to highlight that you can get more vehicle for the same money, essentially. It just comes down to, again, what you're looking for. And even if you do like boxy shapes, you can get even a Forester, which is maybe a little bit less off-road capable than the Outback, but that, has a nice square hatch in the back, and you can get one of those for, again, the same price as this, way more space as far as passenger space goes. So the Bronco Sport's really going to be for people who really don't need the most passenger space possible. They just want something that's still going to be versatile and fun, and they don't mind the compact dimensions. And if that's you, like I said, I really like this thing, and if you don't mind the smaller dimensions and stuff, 100%, I think this would be probably one of my top picks in this segment. I do still really like Mazda. They're one of the other ones that have very compelling vehicles for the same or slightly less money with the CX-30 turbo. Way more power in those. Those feel like they're a German luxury vehicle on the inside, honestly. And I mean, so super luxurious, way nicer than this interior for, again, the same or less money. And those have way more power, but you also have a little bit less cargo space, and of course, no retro styling or any kind of stuff like that. But those are a lot of fun to drive too, with that turbo engine in those things, which really is a lot of punch, but does have less off-road capability as well. So again, compromises and pros and cons to all of these. There's a lot of really good fun options in this segment. I still think I would probably go for the Mazdas because I don't need the off-road thing as much. But if you don't, if you are someone who does value that off-road kind of character and vibe and the adventure thing, I think this is a fantastic choice, probably one of the best choices out there in this segment, honestly. But yeah, so that's about it as far as all my thoughts here on the Bronco Sport. Yeah, I love it a lot more than I was expecting to. It just gets better and better as the miles roll on, honestly, in my opinion. But yeah, so those are all my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thanks to Ford for providing me here with this Bronco Sport to review for you guys today. And yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.